Hello everyone. In this chapter we will dive into the urinary system. As we go through the urinary system, I would like you to keep in mind a number of questions. These questions you will try to find answers to these questions as you are listening to this lecture. So the first question I would like you to keep in mind is what are the functions of the urinary system? The second question is what are the organs of the urinary system and what is their makeup? What is the structure of each of the organ? How is urine formed in your body? How is the urinary system involved in maintaining a relatively internal balance, whether it is in terms of pH or water salt balance? So we are going to address homeostasis. And finally, what are some disorders associated with the dysfunctioning of the urinary system? Please keep these questions in mind, and as you listen to lecture, try to write down the answers to each of these questions. All right, so our first step is to address the functions of the urinary system. Now, in terms of the function of the urinary system, know that the urinary system is very important, if not essential, in maintaining homeostasis in our body, which is maintaining a relatively internal environment that is stable. This is in terms of pH, we have to maintain a relatively stable internal pH, but also in terms of the volume of body fluids. To do so, the urinary system is going to play a very important role at eliminating waste that otherwise, when accumulated in our body, are going to create our body to be out of balance. What are some of the waste? The first one we are going to mention is urea. Urea is actually a byproduct of the metabolism of proteins. So urea, it's actually going to be eliminated from our body because if not, that urea is going to find itself in the blood, which is going to cause a condition that we call uremia, which is really a bad condition for our body. The next waste that we find in the urine is creatinine. Creatinine is the byproduct of the metabolism of creatine. Now, creatine, it's a molecule that plays a very important role in our muscle. It's the molecule that stores energy. Now, you know that for our muscles to function, you need ATP, right? ATP is what causes movement of our muscles. However, we are never able to store many minutes worth of ATP to secure movement of our muscles. Rather, ATP is not stored in form of ATP, but the energy is stored in our muscle in the form of creatine phosphate. That creatine phosphate actually loses the phosphate and transfer that phosphate to ADP as needed so that ADP becomes ATP. That ATP is what is going to power our muscles so movement can occur. Once the phosphate is stripped off, then creatine phosphate becomes creatine, right? Now, that creatine undergo metabolic processes. And in the process, it becomes creatinine. And creatinine, it's a waste that needs to be discarded. So it is found in the urine. Another waste I need to mention is uric acid. Uric acid is the byproduct of nucleotide metabolism, right? Now, when uric acid chemicals are released, they need to go in the urine. Now, what we do see sometimes it's that a high concentration of uric acid is going to cause the molecules to come to cling together and to form crystals. These crystals can sometimes go and accumulate in our articulations. For instance, our toes or our knees, different places where you have articulations, right? And this cause these crystals to hurt the tissues where they are stored, right? Where this crystal develop. And this causes a condition that we call the gout. Okay? It's really a very painful condition. And then we have ammonia. Ammonia, it's a byproduct of the metabolism of proteins. All these chemicals, urea, creatinine, uric acid, ammonia, have to be released from as a waste out of our body through a process of mixturation, right? Which is urination, if you will. Now, the urinary system is going to play a very important role in maintaining the water-salt balance, which plays a very important role in blood pressure. Another function is to maintain an acid-base balance, which actually contributes to maintain a proper pH in our body. Now, the normal pH in our body is around 7.4. We are going to come back to this at some point. The urinary system also produces some hormones. These hormones are of two kinds. You have renin and erythropoietin. Renin is actually a hormone that controls the release of another chemical. That chemical is aldosterone. Okay? Aldosterone plays a very important role in the control of the water-salt balance, which means that they are involved in the control of blood pressure. Renin, actually, it's a protein. Erythropoietin, on the other hand, it's a hormone that is involved in the production of red blood cells. You remember when we covered the chapter on the production of blood cells, right? We did say that in low oxygen, the body is going to need a high amount of red blood cell. So in response to low oxygen, the kidney produce erythropoietin that is going to cause the stem cells in the red bone marrow to differentiate into red blood cells. Some other functions of the urinary system is to participate in the synthesis of vitamin D. Vitamin D that is important for the absorption of calcium. Calcium that is important for many processes in the body, including muscle contraction. What else we can think of? Calcium is also important for blood clotting and many other processes in the body. Now, what are some organs of the urinary system? Well, the main organ, it's going to be the kidney, right here. Okay, so we have the kidney. The kidney is going to receive the blood that needs to be filtered. And after the blood is filtered, that blood that is filtered is going to come from the arteries. And after the blood is filtered, it's going to go in the veins. Out of the filtration process, we are going to have the formations of urines. That urine is going to go through a tube, right, that we call the ureter, right? You have two kidneys, and you have two ureters, right? The ureters are going to convey the urine to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is going to store the urine. And there, when the urinary bladder is full, the urine is going to be sent out of the body through the process of mixturation or urination, and the tube through which the urine is going to go through is called the urethra. The urethra has a different length whether you are in a male or in a female, right? Now, on top of the kidney, you have a gland that sits on top of the kidney. That gland is actually called the adrenal gland. That is the gland that releases aldosterone under the control of renin that is produced by the kidney, right? Renin is produced by the kidney, and that renin is going to act on the adrenal gland that now is going to release aldosterone that plays a very important role in the control of water salt balance or the blood pressure. All right. Now, because of the advance of technology, it is possible now to produce actually new bladders in laboratory. This is actually a bladder that was produced in a laboratory and that is being tested for integrity and be prepared for implantation in a patient that need a new bladder, right? Now, understand that because of all the technologies that we have today, it is completely possible to culture and produce human bladder. Now, the advantage of using the current technology is that the cells of a patient who needs a bladder are the one that are going to be used to produce a new bladder, which limits chances of rejection. But let's close that parenthesis. Let's come back to the bladder. So the bladder, it's actually going to have three holes. You have one hole right here, another one right here, and another one right here. So the two top holes are the holes where the ureters are connecting to the bladder, right? Now, then the next hole is going to be the hole that goes to the urethra, right? Now, in the bladder, you are going to have a layer of tissue, a layer of tissue that covers the bladder. That layer of tissue, it's a epithelium. That epithelium is actually a type of epithelium that we call transitional epithelium. That transitional epithelium actually changes the shape of the cells that make up the epithelium based on the amount of pressure that exists. When the bladder is empty, the cells occur in many shapes. When the bladder is full, the cells of the epithelium appear flat just because of the stretch, right? Now, you have some muscles that make up the wall of the bladder, and you have some connective tissue on the surface, okay, that cover the bladder. Now, beyond that, you are going to have that the bladder, it's an organ that is innervated to contract and relax. When the bladder is full, it stretches. The stretch receptors are going to activate a number of things. One, it's that the stretch receptors are going to send a signal in our spinal cord, and eventually that signal is going to go in the brain to say to the brain that the bladder is full. When that happens, the brain is going to tell us that we need to go to the bathroom, right? Now, before we can go to the bathroom, let me mention a number of muscles that are organized in rings here. You have the internal sphincter muscles, okay? And the external sphincter muscles. The internal sphincter muscle is a ring of muscles that actually closes to keep the urine in the bladder until you receive actually a signal that says that you need to go to the bathroom, right? Now, I have to say that the internal sphincter is a muscle that is controlled not voluntarily. You do not control that muscle. However, there is a muscle that you control, that is the external sphincter. That external sphincter, when you pee, you can squeeze it and stop peeing, right? So for instance, when you receive a signal that you need to go to the bathroom, you can hold your urine in place until you decide to go to the bathroom, right? That's voluntary, right? So in maintaining the urine in the bladder, you really have actually two segments that come into play here. You have some voluntary muscles and involuntary muscles, right? But let me close that parenthesis, right? And move on. Just know that the urinary bladder is an organ that has some muscles, and these muscles can be controlled. Some are controlled voluntarily, some are not controlled voluntarily. Now, let's take a look at the structure of the main organ of filtration of the blood, the kidney. The kidney is bean-shaped. As you can see, it is bean-shaped. It is a very complex structure with two major layers. You have the cortex right here, and you have the medullary layer right here. Now, you're going to have the renal artery that brings the blood to the kidney, and the renal vein that bring the blood out of the kidney. Needless to say that the blood that comes in the kidney through the renal arteries are going to be the blood that needs to be filtered, while the blood that leaves the kidney through the renal veins is the blood that has been filtered, right? Now, if we zoom in the kidney, we are going to see a number of details. So specifically, what do we see? So we are right here in this area. Okay? So now, zooming in the cortex and the medullary layer, so we have the renal cortex here and the renal medulla. We are going to have some teeny tiny structures in there, and these structures are called the nephrons. I want you to remember that term. A nephron, it's actually the filtration unit of the kidney. That filtration unit is the one that filtrates the blood, and out of the blood, the waste goes in forming urine. Urine is going to go through some tubules, and those tubules are going to be very convoluted and then reach what we call a collecting duct. That collecting duct that you see here, right? That collecting duct is going to carry the urine to an area that we call the renal pelvis. Okay, so many collecting ducts are going to release urine in the renal pelvis, right? Eventually, that urine is going to end up in this area right here, that is the renal pelvis, and drip through the ureter. And the ureter is going to carry the urine to the bladder, right? Whether you are laying down or you are in an upright position or even upside down, this organ, the ureter, is still going to be able to carry the urines to the bladder because this organ actually has some muscles. These muscles contract to actually push the urine down to the bladder. And again, regardless of the position of your body, the ureter is going to push the urines to the bladder against gravity or with gravity, it doesn't matter, right? Because of the movement of the muscles that push the urine through. All right. With that said, let's kind of summarize. We have the renal sinus. What is the renal sinus? I'm going to show you. This right here is the renal sinus. Right here, that depression right here, where actually you have the blood vessels that are entering and exiting the kidney, okay, and the ureter, the ureters that enters or exits the kidney. So, right here, okay, that's the renal sinus. Then you're going to have the hilus, or the hilum, I'm sorry. The hilum is going to be the entrance to the renal sinus. Then we have the renal pelvis I showed you earlier, okay? We have the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is going to be divided in two areas. You're going to have the major calyces and the minor calyces. Now, the major calyces and the minor calyces, let me show you. So, here you have the pelvis, right? The renal pelvis. So, here you have the calyces, the minor calyces, and the major calyce. Okay? Then we have the renal medulla. This is where you are going to have the nephrons getting through. This is the inner part of the kidney, right? And that inner part of the kidney is going to have the renal pyramids. And the reason why we call them renal pyramids, it's because of the triangular shape of the structure. Okay? Then we're going to have the renal cortex. That's the surface of the kidney. The renal column, actually, that structure sits between two. This structure sits between two. Boy, I'm drawing a blank. Two renal pyramids. I'm sorry, two renal pyramids. So basically, here is the renal column, right here. All right. Here is another one, right here. Okay, that would be the renal column. Then we have the renal capsule. The renal capsule, it's really the place that surrounds actually the filtration unit. It's a fibrous capsule basically around the kidney. Then we are going to have the nephrons. The nephrons, again, is the filtration unit, right? It's a filtration unit of the kidney. This is the part that actually make the urine. So here you have a part where most of the filtration is happening. That's the glomerulus, okay? That's a glomerulus. You're going to have the glomerular capsule, okay? That glomerular capsule, it's the area where the urine is going to be released, okay? So we have the renal artery here that takes the blood to the kidney, right? That blood is going to go through the capillaries, and there you are going to have a filtration of the blood. Now, when we look at the arteries that are taking the blood to the glomerulus, we notice that there are two arteries. You have the artery that brings the blood to the glomerulus. That artery, it's actually the afferent arteriole. So here we have the artery. This is an arteriole. This is another arteriole. So we have the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole is the one that takes the blood to the glomerulus. Then we're going to have the efferent arteriole that takes the blood out of the glomerulus. Now, before the blood leaves the kidney, that blood is going to undergo further filtration and reabsorption. And you can see that you do have a capillary bed that is mingled with a convoluted tubule that actually is very complexly folded, right? But runs alongside with the capillary bed along the nephron unit, right? At the end, you have an exit of the blood from the nephron, right, through the renal venule here, and to end up in the renal vein in here, right? Now, you have the blood vessels in one hand, how they are organized in the nephron, but you also have the filtration system itself. Now, in the filtration system, you have the glomerulus, this machinery, you have the convoluted tubules, you have the proximal convoluted tubules, okay? You have the distal convoluted tubules here, and you have a loop that goes down and up. Now, as we look at that, for the loop, the guy who discovered the loop was called Henle. Henle. So we call that loop the loop of Henle, or the descending loop and the ascending loop. The descending limb and the ascending limb of the loop, right, of Henle. So I want you to remember the name of Henle. He's the guy who actually discovered this loop. And now the distal convoluted tubule drops the urine in the collecting duct right here. And the collecting duct is going to conduct urines to the ureter and eventually in the urinary bladder. So please review the different components of the nephron. Now, zooming into the filtrating cells, we are going to have the a number of cells here, the proximal convoluted tubule cells here. These proximal convoluted tubule cells are going to be ciliated, right? You have the cilia here. You have the mitochondria that speaks to how much energy is needed here, right, to run these cells for filtration to occur. You do have the microvilli that are actually going to increase the surface of exchange so that as much filtration can occur. You have the nucleus of the cells that are actually doing the filtration. Okay, you are going to have the peritubular capillaries. These peritubular capillaries right here are basically the cells that make up the blood capillaries, right? You can see the cells right here that are simple squamous epithelium. Okay, so the chemicals are going to go from the blood here to the from the blood cells to the kidney cells, and from the kidney cells to the blood cell. All right. So, in terms of the renal vessels, you have different names based on where these renal vessels are located. So you are going to have the interlobar arteries and vein. Interlobar. So you have one pyramid right here and another pyramid right here. Okay? So you're going to have in between, that's why we call this interlobar arteries and veins. That is the reason why. Then you have the arcuate arteries and veins. The arcuate arteries and vein, it's because of their position that is like an arc on top of the pyramid, right? So they are like, they form an arch, right? That's why they are called arcuate arteries and vein. And the reason why I'm explaining this, it's because you don't need to necessarily memorize the names as is, but remembering the location, you can tell the name of the artery and the vein, right? If it's between lobes, so that's 1, 2. Between lobes, it's going to be interlobar, right? They form an arc, they are arcuate, right? Okay. What else do I need to mention here? We have the cortical arteries and vein. The cortical arteries and vein, cortical stands for cortex, right? These are the veins and arteries that are located in the cortex area, right? We have the peritubular capillaries, around, tubular around the tubule. This is the tubule right here, right? Okay, these are the tubules. The distant convoluted, the proximal convoluted, right? The loop of Henle, right? We have the glomerular capillaries, the glomerulus. Where is the glomerulus? Right here, right? So the glomerular capillaries, you can tell where they are, okay? Now, other thing that is worth mentioning here is that there are two types of nephrons based on their position in the kidney. When we say in the kidney, we really mean the cortex and the medullary layer, right? You have some cortical nephrons. The cortical nephrons are these nephrons that are mostly in the cortex area, while the juxtamedullary nephrons, medullary, so this is the medulla, right? Okay, so these nephrons that are deeply buried in the medullary layer are the one that are juxtamedullary nephrons. And notice that the position of the glomerulus, it's also very close to the medullary layer, right? Okay, so considering the position of the nephrons, you can tell which one is a cortical nephron, which one is a juxtamedullary nephron. Considering the position of the blood vessels, you can name these blood vessels. All right. So use these tricks to actually be able to differentiate the different organs. Okay. So some more details here in the anatomy of the nephron. You have the renal cortex. We mentioned that. We have the medullary layer. We mentioned that, right? Now, looking at the glomerulus, you're going to have an arteriole that brings the blood to the glomerulus. This is the afferent arteriole. I want you to remember that. And then you have the blood that exits the glomerulus. This is the efferent arteriole. Please remember that. In here, you are going to have a bunch of filtration that is going to happen, right? Okay, so this whole structure is the glomerulus. You're going to have the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule. That parietal layer, notice that the cells are squamous. This is a simple squamous epithelium, which tells you that a lot of diffusion is happening in that area. Okay? I want you to remember that. Notice the proximal tubules. Notice the shape of the cells. These cells are all flat, right? These cells right here are also flat. So a lot of filtration, a lot of diffusion is happening here. Remember the association between structure and function. Knowing the structure, you can deduct the function, sometimes not always. And knowing the function, you can deduct the structure, sometimes but not always, right? Please keep that in mind. Okay, so the blood goes through the afferent arteriole, flows in the glomerulus, and after the glomerulus, it's going to go to the efferent arteriole, then the peritubular capillaries. And in the peritubular capillaries, there is going to be reabsorption and excretion, right? Let me repeat that. In the peritubular capillaries, you're going to have reabsorption and excretion. All right. So here you have the glomerulus, right? Blood comes in, blood goes out, right? You have the proximal convoluted tubule, you have the distal convoluted tubule, you have the loop of Henle here, with the descending limb and the ascending limb, right? Oh, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. Sorry. We have the descending limb and ascending limb because the glomerulus, it goes like this. So here we have the proximal area. So we have going down, descending, and here going up, up, up to the collecting duct here. All right. So we already discussed about this, but what I did not say is actually, walk you through the renal artery, from the renal artery to the interlobar artery, from that to the arcuate artery, from the arcuate artery to the cortical radiate artery, from the cortical radiate artery to the afferent arterial. From the afferent arterial, we're going to have the blood is going to flow through the glomerular capillaries, and from there, the blood is going to leave the glomerulus through the efferent arterial. From the efferent arterial, the blood is going to go to the peritubular capillaries, all right? And then from there, you're going to have the blood that goes to the cortical radiate vein. From there to the arcuate vein, to the interlobular vein, to the renal vein. And in terms of the formation of the urine, everything starts in the glomerulus. From the glomerulus, the urine goes in the glomerular capsule. From there, it moves to the proximal tubule. From the proximal tubules goes to the descending limb of the loop, then the ascending limb of the loop, then the distal tubule, then the collecting duct, and from the collecting duct to the minor calyx, to the major calyx, to the renal pelvis, to the ureter, to the urinary bladder, and to the urethra. Now, let's say that the nephron is going to go from the glomerulus to the distal convoluted tubule. That's the glomerulus, and this is where the urine is forming, right? Once the urine is in a collecting duct, that's it, right? The urine is almost completely done. There is no reabsorption. There is no further processing, right? Then once the urine finds itself in the minor calyx, that's it. No more going backward, okay? So this urine is going to drip down to the ureters and the bladder. And now we are really in the excretion mode here. Notice that after the formation of the urine here, what we call the primary urine formation, right? You are going to have reabsorption and secretion. Reabsorption is going to happen at two locations. One, it's going to be some reabsorption happening in the proximal convoluted tubule. The last reabsorption is happening at the distal convoluted tubule, while the secondary secretions are going to happen in the proximal convoluted tubule, okay, and the distal convoluted tubule. This is where the reabsorptions and tubular secretions are going to occur, right? So at that point, the primary urine, when it reaches the distal convoluted tubule and goes in the collecting duct, it's not primary urine anymore. It's actually secondary urine, which is the final urine, right? And what are you going to find in there? You are going to find water, urea, uric acid, the salt, ammonia, and creatinine. All right. Now, when we look into the glomerulus for the urine formation, you're going to have water, urea, glucose, amino acids, uric acid, and salt. Now, because glucose should not be found in the urine, that glucose is going to be reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubule and the proximal. How about amino acids? Same thing. Amino acids are going to be reabsorbed, right? So that technically you should not find any of these chemicals in the final urine, technically. So the glomerular filtration is going to actually filter water, nitrogenous waste, nutrients, and salt in the form of ions, right? What are the components that cannot be filtered? We're going to have all the formed elements, including red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and also plasma proteins, right? So technically, the plasma proteins, you should not find them in the urine. If you find them in the urine, that is a bad sign that the kidneys are not properly doing their job. Now, how about reabsorption? The reabsorption is basically going to happen with water. So you notice that you have a reabsorption that is 99% of the water that is going to be reabsorbed. In other words, you don't really eliminate a lot of water, right? You don't eliminate a lot of sodium either, right? You have 99.5% of sodium that is reabsorbed, right? You have all the glucose that is reabsorbed. Now, look at urea, okay? You have only 44% that is reabsorbed, which means that you are eliminating the majority of it, right? And that's why you find it in large amount in the urine. In terms of tubular reabsorption here, you're going to have water that is reabsorbed, okay? You're going to have nutrients reabsorbed, salt reabsorbed. Anything that is not reabsorbed, it's anything that is in excess, right? Some water is not going to be reabsorbed because if you do have an excess, right? And plus the urine has to be diluted, right? Much of the nitrogenous waste and the excess salt. I said excess, right? We can analyze the urine for its quality. Typical urine is going to have a pH that fall between 4.5 and 8. In the normal urine, you should not have glucose. You should not have bilirubin, which is actually produced in the kidney. You are going to have some urobilinogen. That is the reason of the color of the urine. You should have no ketones in there, which are byproduct of sugars. You should have no plasma proteins, such as albumin, the globulins, okay? No nitrate should be in there, and no nitrite, right? No white blood cells. Obviously, no red blood cells should be found in the urine, okay? Now, the kidney plays a central role in homeostasis. Because of the importance of this, we are going to stop the chapter here and spend some more time on homeostasis. Thank you for your attention for now.